Hello, friends. Welcome to the Thinning of the Veil podcast. I'm your host, Tia Smith. And yes, things are not necessarily my same normal. Um, I have some chaos going on in my life in the background. We had a fridge break and drip through, and needless to say, there are several workers in our house trying to clean up the damage that was done downstairs and more importantly, upstairs. So I have workers just in and out of my house all day long, which kind of complicates the podcasting process. So today will just be a story day and we'll see how this thing progresses during the week. I'm not quite sure. There's some things that they're looking at. Maybe with asbestos, we bought an older home that we have fixed up. And so there's concern there. And obviously for my health, that is a concern. So we'll just see what happens. I may not even have access to my recording uh, things this week. We'll just see. I don't know. Life is always just throwing something at you. I also wanted to address, I think, really quickly, conference. Um, it was really, really good in so many ways, and I was so grateful that I could go and meet in that first session. I think the thing that really settled on my soul the most, with all of the things that have happened with President Nelson's passing, with the tragedy in Michigan, I really feel like there was power in meeting together. And as I looked around that huge, really full conference center, I realized that there are so many of us who are going to stand in our testimony and not be afraid of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and to be um, really purposeful in what we're talking about and what we're testifying of. And I think Satan does a really good job of isolating us in our testimonies, or thinking that we're not normal, as I referenced before, where most of us are experiencing some kind of upheaval within our own relationships that are super close to us, that sometimes Satan can really, really make us feel unimportant and isolated in our testimonies of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and in our testimony of the Savior and his atoning sacrifice, and also then his power that he has to strengthen us and uplift us. And it was just so poignant for me to see all of the believers and that was just a small fraction, right? We're all around the world, all of the saints listening all around the world. It really impacted me to keep going and to keep testifying, because like other people that are voicing publicly their testimony of the Savior and of the reality of the truthfulness of the gospel of Jesus Christ, I too have received a lot of backlash online. I've received a lot of very mean comments, the same old pool that everyone else is swimming in. You're not a Christian, all of those fun things. And, you know, sometimes that does affect you, and sometimes that does seem to have, um, it weighs heavily some days. And some days it falls off rolls right off your back. So I think for me, that was one of the most important things. Uh, Another cool thing, it was interesting. We were leaving the conference and it was just raining and pouring, and the weather wasn't good, which meant there wasn't so many protesters outside. But there was this man as we were walking to get to our car, a very old gentleman. I was actually feeling bad for him that he was out in the rain, but he was not testifying. He was actually um, just being really mean and yelling as we were walking down the sidewalk about how he's been in the countries with with all of the other infidels, and that kind of tells you where you're at, where he's just calling everyone an infidel. And he goes, "And you are no different." And I looked him straight in the eye, and he caught my gaze, and he backed up and he says, "But you're all really, really, really nice." And I just kind of laughed and smiled, and he's like, "But you're all going to hell," and all of those things. And I said, "Have a nice day." And he kept screaming, and I said, "Have a nice day." And he kept getting louder, and I just said, "Have a nice day." And that was interesting to me, because the moment that he caught my gaze, and I had love for this man. I don't know who he was. he obviously believed what he believed in wholly, and you have to give him credit if he's going to stand out there and profess his beliefs. Unfortunately, in him professing his beliefs, he felt like he had to degrade other people who are just trying to worship Jesus Christ in the way that they feel is right for them. But he backed up and he says, but you're all really, really nice. So good job, all my members of the church, for being really, really nice people. And I think really that was the theme of the conference, was that we are all really, really nice people, and that we should then emulate that in our lives and within the relationships that we're struggling, and do what Christ did, which is uh, feed the hungry, heal the blind, mourn with those that mourn, even if they don't agree with us. And there was some really truly remarkable people out there who had a miracle for the shooter and the shooter's wife and child. And my daughter talked about how poignant that was for her. My daughter and I may disagree on some things, but she's recognized the goodness in that, and I was grateful for that. So I, though, want to address the glaring elephant in the room. There was, oh, I'm going to cry. There was no new temples announced. And I think for so long that's been a part of my general conference experience, and kind of that spiritual momentum that carried me through the next 6 months, that the work is moving forward at an accelerated pace. And I loved moving within that space. Obviously, the quorum of the 12 apostles know and understand way more than I could, for sure. And obviously there's reasons why there wasn't going to be announced in that general conference any new temples. And uh, dear President Oaks, the emotion that was, I can't imagine the weight that's kind of weighing on him right now. And, making that announcement, I, I don't know. I didn't know how to process it really well. It's not that there's not going to be more temples, and I understand that, and um, more temples announced. Wow, it was just a change. But I think that's the cool thing about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is that there's going to be continual change as we get ready for the second coming of the Savior, that we support and love and really try to get our own testimonies of the coming in prophet and of the quorum of the 12 apostles, and know that they are being led, because this really wasn't a church led by President Nelson. The ultimate really person in all of this that we need to focus on is the Savior. He truly is leading and guiding and directing this church through these very difficult times. And there are reasons that, unbeknownst to us, we don't have the full picture. But this work will move forward, and it will start looking more different and more different as we get closer and closer. So those are kind of my 2 cents on conference. I will be, obviously adding quotes here and there, but this week I wanted to talk about uh, our continuing, I guess, conversation about the three Nephites and the sanctified ones, because I think a lot of times as we're searching and seeking to become better, to become like our Savior, and we've talked a lot about what it means to be a sanctified one, there are certain blessings that go along with it, and we addressed those a little bit last week. We are going to continue to talk about that this week within the context of our bodies and some of the gifts that come from being a sanctified one, and look at the pattern within the three Nephites and how that even applies to us. But today I wanted to read 3 stories. And one of them is one that's fully documented in church history about the three Nephites. The other one is an encounter that was said that Joseph Smith said was a three Nephite experience to this family. And the other one is just a really cool experience that was attributed to the three Nephites. And again, these are just stories, but we will have the doctrine later on this week. I'm not quite sure Again, I'm not quite sure how this is all going to play itself out. So today is story day, and tomorrow may be the actual main episode this week, or it may be the um, the talk. We're just not quite sure. I know for sure Thursday is still going to be the Gathering Academy with Colette. But other than that, buckle up because I'm not quite sure which direction this is all heading in, based on what's happening in my life. I cannot wait for things to slow down. And I say that knowing that it's probably not going to slow down, especially within the YSA context where it's just ramping up. So I wanted to read, and I'm taking this, I want to remind us as we read through these stories. In Hebrews 13, verse 2, it says, "Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares." Now, when I'm talking about this first story, it's taken from, I'm taking it from a blog post that someone wrote because, I mean, this story that I'm going to share is everywhere, right? But I really like the way that quote Stan is his name, and the blog is My Life in Zion, wrote about this particular experience. And I thought, why am I going to try to rewrite something that something has done a great job on? And again, I'll include all the links in the description of the videos, so that if you want, you can go revisit where I'm pulling these sources from. He begins in the spring of 1829. The prophet Joseph Smith was laboring vigorously to translate the record of the Book of Mormon. Joseph and his wife Emma had moved to Harmony, Pennsylvania, a small hamlet in the Susquehanna Valley, to escape outside pressures and persecution. There in Harmony, Joseph and Emma lived in a small cabin on the corner of Emma's father's farm. While Joseph labored during the days to provide for his wife as a farmer, he was also laboring to fulfill the Lord's command to fulfill a sacred duty. The work, both physically and spiritually, was demanding. Much to Joseph's relief, the Lord sent Oliver Cowdery, a school teacher, in early April of that year to assist the illiterate Joseph in the process of translation. As the work continued, the persecution that Joseph had experienced so greatly in New York began to likewise show up in Pennsylvania. Shortly after beginning to assist Joseph Smith with the work of translation, Oliver wrote to his friend David Whitmer in Fayette Township, back in New York State. Oliver enthusiastically testified that Joseph Smith had the ancient records and that the work was divine and true. He soon sent a few lines of the translation and bore witness that he knew the plates contained a record of the people who once inhabited this continent. David Whitmer, then 24 years of age, eagerly showed these letters to his parents and brothers and sisters. As persecution began to intensify in the Harmony area late in the month of May, Oliver communicated with David about the possibility of Joseph and Oliver going to stay with the Whitmer family in Fayette. In response, Peter Whitmer Sr., David's father, invited Joseph to stay at his farm home as long as was needed to finish the work of translation. David's brother, John, offered to help as Joseph's scribe. Many people in the Fayette area were anxious to hear more about the work. As farmers, the Whitmers knew that a late May planting was essential for a successful fall crop and harvest. With such thoughts in mind, the senior Whitmer, Peter, advised his son David that he had to plow and prepare the soil before he could take his 2-horse wagon to pick up Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery down in Pennsylvania. Obediently, David followed his father's counsel, although anxious to complete what seemed to be a mundane task. At the end of his first day of plowing, he found he had accomplished in one day what normally would have taken 2 days to do. He was astonished. David's father was likewise impressed by his apparent miracle. Peter Whitmer Sr. said, "There must be an overruling hand in this, and I think you had better go down to Pennsylvania as soon as your plaster of Paris is sown." Plaster of Paris was used to reduce the acidity of the soil. However, the next morning when David went to sow the plaster on the fields, to his surprise, he found the work had already been done. His sister, who lived beside the field, said that her children had called her to watch three strangers the day before spread the plaster with remarkable skill and speed. She assumed they were men David had hired to speed up the work. They were not. Grateful for this divine intervention, David Whitmer hurried off on the 3-day, 100-mile journey to Harmony. Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery met him as he approached the town, although David had not told them exactly when he was coming. Joseph had seen in vision the details of David's trip to Harmony. These small miracles witnessed by David and the rest of the Whitmer family testified of the prophet Joseph's seership and the Lord's intervention for the successful translation of the Book of Mormon. After a short time in Pennsylvania, these three men, Joseph, Oliver, and David, left en route back to Fayette, New York. Joseph, before departing, had delivered the plates from which the Book of Mormon was being translated back to the angel Moroni for safekeeping during their journey. One day, as the men were riding along in the wagon, another unique experience occurred in relation to the sacred work in which they were engaged. David Whitmer said the following: "A very pleasant, nice-looking old man suddenly appeared by the side of our wagon and saluted us with, 'Good morning, it is very warm,' at the same time wiping his face or forehead with his hand. We returned the salutation, and by a sign from Joseph, I invited him to ride if he was going our way. But he said very pleasantly, 'No, I am going to Cumorah.' This name was something new to me. I did not know what Cumorah meant. We all gazed at him and at each other, and as I looked around inquiringly of Joseph, the old man disappeared. Joseph then related to his brethren that the man they had just seen was in fact the ancient prophet Moroni." The really cool thing about this particular story is that when we are involved in the work, and I love that they pointed out that it was in the process of trying to get the Book of Mormon translated, this very sacred work, that you receive miracles. The Whitmer family was visited by three men, and notably, it is attributed to the three Nephites who came and helped David so that the work could move forward. That is really what I'm going to talk about, is the really correspondence between doing the Lord's work, especially in these last days, and the physical help that we can have through angels from the other side of the veil or on this side of the veil, as in the case of the three Nephites, to really get this work done. And as we learn things this week about the three Nephites and about the sanctified ones, I hope that we can really understand that it is connected because of the work. If we are involved in the work, my friends, we will have miracles such that we cannot comprehend, especially as we're moving forward, preparing this mighty work for the Savior to come within the temple context. The next story that I want to read is the story where the prophet Joseph Smith really identifies the stranger that was involved with this particular family. This is compiled in a book written by Lundwall, and the note on the beginning of the story I'm going to read. While visiting Portland, Oregon during the month of September 1938, President William R. Sloan related the following incident to the compiler of this book. It was a cold night in the latter part of November, and in the home of William Huntington, the family gathered around the big fireplace in the spacious kitchen. After the evening meal, when all the evening work was done, it was the habit of this family to get their instruments of music and sit around the blazing logs and play the old-fashioned tunes and hymns, also tunes of a more cheerful air, although they did not dance. Grandfather Huntington played the bass viol, his daughter Zina, the cello, William the cornet, and Dimmick the drum. There were 5 sons and 2 daughters. The oldest daughter, Presenda, being married, lived some distance from them. It was a happy New England family, and they lived in the clean, pure life of the Puritan stock. After the music ceased, a hush fell on the group, and a knock was heard on the door. and as it opened, a strange old gentleman of medium weight, dressed in old-fashioned clothes and carrying a bundle on his arm, appeared and stepped into the room and said, I usually bend my steps to some sequestered vale. May I find lodging here tonight? With cordial welcome, he was invited in and given a place by the fire in an old, easy farm chair, and Mother Huntington asked if he would like some supper, and modestly he said he would. Then a good New England meal was spread before him with milk, honey, maple syrup, cold meat, delicious homemade bread and butter. He partook of a light supper while the family spoke in soft tones. It was the custom to read a portion of the scriptures before going to bed. He again joined the circle, and Father Huntington began to read from the Holy Bible, a portion of the New Testament to which they all listened attentively. Grandmother Huntington made some comment on the fact that they would like to hear the gospel in its fullness, as explained and taught by the Savior. The stranger immediately took up the subject and began explaining the scriptures and quoting the sayings of the Savior in what seemed to them a new light and greater beauty than they had ever thought of before. They sat in rapt attention, listening to every word. Both Father and Mother Huntington agreed with his explanations, while the boys exchanged glances of admiration, and the daughter Zina was spellbound and sat and gazed upon the stranger with admiration and reverence. After 1 hour spent in conversation upon this sacred subject, Father Huntington had prayers, Mother Huntington prepared a comfortable resting place for the stranger, and he bid them good night. The boys going upstairs, Father and Mother Huntington to their bedroom, which led from the kitchen, and Zina in her little bed heard her parents talking in low tones about the wonderful stranger and discussed the things he said. The stranger had filled them with awe and reverence, such as they had never felt before. In the morning, everyone was astir, bright and early, as is usual on a farm, when so much work has to be done, both outside and in. The stranger sat placidly, watching the remarkable family with whom he took breakfast. The family invited him to stay, but he said he had other places to visit, and he left them standing in a group as he closed the door softly. When Father Huntington saw the stranger depart, he sent Dimmick after him to tell him to come again. He immediately opened the door, and they all looked out to see and call the stranger back, but he was nowhere to be seen. When looking on the doorstep where the snow had fallen the night before, no trace of a footstep could be seen, and the boys, running from all directions, said that he had vanished and could not be found. Father Huntington remarked that he was the strangest person that ever was, and he could not understand where he went, but he had shown them the gospel in a new light. Mother Huntington felt that this stranger was some messenger from heaven, and all the family were deeply impressed with his wonderful influence and beautiful way of explaining the scriptures. When the gospel of life and salvation was brought to them by Hiram Smith and other elders, they seemed to coincide with what the stranger had told them concerning the Bible and the restoration of the gospel. All the family but one accepted the gospel and prepared to emigrate in a few years to Kirtland. Here they met the prophet of God, Joseph Smith, and became his faithful and loyal followers and friends. On one occasion, when the prophet Joseph was speaking of the 3 Nephites, Brother Huntington related this little incident to him. He laid his hand on his head and said, "My dear brother, that man was one of the 3 Nephites who came to prepare you for the restoration of the gospel and its acceptance." When we're talking about the 3 Nephites, my friends, and there's a lot of stories that can be attributed to the 3 Nephites. Obviously, these are testimonies of personal experience, but this one was validated by the prophet Joseph Smith as being one for this family, in that it was preparing them to receive the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. And so when that stranger came, one of the 3 Nephites came to this family and taught them about the gospel, they were able to recognize the truth almost immediately when it was taught to them by Hiram Smith. The story follows many incidents of a smaller nature occurred, but those were days when the children of men were seeking for guidance in the new and enduring faith, which is as old as the world, but had been forsaken by men, and it was again brought forth by the power of God through his humble servant, Joseph Smith. Again, it's about the gathering, my friends. All of the work of the three Nephites is about the gathering, and we'll discuss the doctrines related to that either tomorrow or Friday. We'll just see. I wanted to read one last story that I thought was remarkable. And again, this is a personal experience that they feel like was a visit from one of the three Nephites. And I think it's interesting that a lot of these stories contain only one of the three Nephites, not three of them altogether. That seems to be a commonality among all of these very sacred experiences and miracles. This one takes place a little bit closer to us in history. It has followed the other two previous stories in time, um, and so I think sometimes we attribute, and I think that's part of our unbelief that these things can't happen to us. We can't have these sacred experiences or visits. And we'll talk later about what would necessitate a visit from one of these messengers from heaven, one of these three Nephites who are walking among the earth trying to spread the gospel and make sure that those things are happening. This one in particular, again, really spoke to me. At the time of the first settlement of Payson, Utah, a man was sent on a mission to Germany while the wife was left in Payson to manage their rather isolated farmland. One winter morning, a tall, elderly gentleman knocked at her door. Not a little surprised at seeing a stranger in this sparsely populated region, she invited him in. He told her he had traveled far and was very hungry. Food was never plentiful in that household, and the fact that it was midwinter caused a greater scarcity than ever. However, the good woman, wrapping part of a loaf of bread in an old bit of peculiarly patterned cloth, offered it to the stranger. The old man thanked her and went his way. The woman followed him to the door and found he had disappeared without leaving a single track in the snow. This incident took place one day before Christmas, and that fact, together with the strangeness of the whole proceeding, caused the young woman to remember the date. Several years later, the day after her husband's return, she was helping him to unpack his belongings when she found, carefully folded in a corner of his trunk, the same odd piece of cloth in which she had wrapped the stranger's bread. Her husband related to her this story. It was on the day before Christmas. The money which was to pay my expenses was many days overdue, and I was alone and penniless in a strange city. I had not eaten for 2 days. Upon looking up, I perceived a tall, elderly gentleman walking toward me. I turned aside to allow him to pass, but he took me by the arm and, removing a package from his pocket, wrapped in this piece of cloth, placed it in my hand. He then said, "Go to the post office. Even now your money awaits you there." Without another word, he turned and disappeared around a nearby corner. I opened the package and found it contained a half loaf of fresh bread. Later, I went to the post office and found the money just as he had said. And that was taken from an anonymous manuscript in the files of Writers Project for the Utah State Historical Society. I love this story because I think it's not only spans continents, which is truly a miracle in so many ways, but it also is a spanning of a husband and wife, both sacrificing because they know that the gospel is true, both involved in the gathering in their sphere of influence, being kind to strangers and really giving the last, I think, of the widow's mite within this context of the story. When we are talking about miracles and we're talking about the gathering of Israel, the two subjects go hand in hand all the time. In fact, it is a work that necessitates miracles. It is a work that necessitates visitors from the other side of the veil, and also the three Nephites that are on this side of the veil. As we study this week, there's a physical aspect to the sanctified ones that was emulated through the three Nephites, and we're going to study that a little bit more. I am grateful that I am able to, well, the Lord has asked me really to study these things in more depth than I ever have before, for I found great knowledge, great understanding, especially for within my own personal life. I think a lot of times we put podcasters or whatever on this certain persona that we think that they are, and forget that they have a life behind the screen. They have a life behind the work that they are doing, and that we struggle just as much as anyone else struggles with all the normal things. And so I am grateful to be able to not have to pay attention sometimes to those quite very normal things that I'm currently experiencing. And it seems like there is a little bit still yet to come for me. But I'm grateful that you tune in every week for me, and I draw strength from your testimonies. I draw strength from your praying for me. I know that there's a lot of people out there praying for me, and I appreciate it. I think that we currently have a sick member as well in our family, and I'm just crossing all my fingers and all my toes, everything that I can cross, that I don't get sick. And then, and then I worry about the asbestos that may or may not be flying around in my house. But God is always in charge, and He is sustaining and uplifting every single one of us. And as we move forward, looking, after this past conference, looking to the changes that might be coming, may we really take time to pray and get that personal testimony of these things for ourselves, that we may testify of these things to others as we move through the changes. There's some cool things happening. Again, we're going to be talking about the three Nephites in context of the sanctified ones, and how that relates to us physically and the miracles that happen from that. I've got a really cool talk that I'm actually going to read and not have AI read it. We'll talk about that when we get to that point. And then next week, I have this super cool new friend of mine, who reached out. So again, a plug for all of you to reach out if you have a story or an ancestor story. These miracles need to be told. And I'm grateful for those who have done that. But she reached out. She actually has her descendants. She's a descendant of slaves that were on the plantation, and also the slave ships. She has had some remarkable thinning of the veil experiences within that context. And it's a context that a lot of us don't understand and know about. And so I'm super excited for her to tell her really sacred testimony of these things, and relate to us how God really is in the details of saving all of His sons and daughters, no matter where they've came from, no matter what their descendants had to sacrifice, that we all can be a part of the gospel of Jesus Christ. God truly works in mysterious ways, my friends. I hope that you really ponder the blessings and miracles that you have in your life and your role in the gathering as we talk about all of these subjects, and we'll continue to talk about these subjects. So have a great day, my friends, and we will for sure see you tomorrow. I'm not sure what particular thing will be, so it's just going to be a surprise for all of us. Thanks for hanging in there with me, my friends. Love your guts. We'll see ya. Bye.